It's great to be here tonight. Thank you so much for coming out, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this group. Um, I'm a plantsman at heart, and I love to talk about plants and gardens. And you're in trouble because you've let a designer come in the room, and we're going to have a little bit of fun talking about design for just a little bit. One of the things I love when you get a group of people together on a panel is how things end up connecting between the different talks. And I want to thank Stuart. I got to meet him a couple of years ago. We served on a committee to choose some trees for a new planting along the Mars Hill expanded corridor. You may have driven that. It's 4 lanes now. So you can look forward to seeing some pretty cool plant material out there. Bald cypress, American holly, deodar cedar, Grancy graybeard, if you know what that is. So some kind of different stuff, not just your typical, no Bradford pears. Mike Durr was on that committee too. We had to endure the Durr. And Tommy, I'm going to touch on a couple of things Tommy had to say. He talked about shaping our space. We all want to shape our space, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. And that's even part of our logo at the College of Environment and Design. So I'll talk a bit about that. Tommy also helped me learn that I'm only 4 years away from being historic. So great. And it it occurred to me today working on this presentation that I'm so much more interested in history, to be honest, than I ever was as a child growing up. I know some people are truly interested in history from a young age. I wish that had been me, but I'm much more interested in it. And I realized that probably the reason you're more interested in it is because you begin to reach a point where possibly more of your life is behind you than in front of you. And so therefore it's way more exciting to look back. That's a bit morbid, isn't it? But anyway, and I have to say, it's so nice to meet you, Peggy, the Garden Club. The Garden Club is one of the best friends of the College of Environment Design, and I know the horticulture program at UGA, as well as Stuart Cofer and his family throughout the generations. So much generosity that we're thankful for. Many of our students can continue to study because of funds that have been put aside for that. So thank you very much. Okay. Oh, this is in the wrong place. Maybe I did that. Okay, look, and we have some of the same slides again. So great minds think alike. I wanted to try to keep it simple. Talk about 4 things tonight. First, a little bit about American gardens in Athens, Georgia. And tie to history. I have to talk about the birth of the landscape architecture program at UGA. I won't get paid if I don't do that. And the changing garden styles and garden ethics. I don't know if you've thought much about landscape ethics and garden ethics. And then the role gardens play today. So, and again, the Founder's Garden is so important to the Garden Club and also to the College of Environment Design, because we are lucky enough because of their generosity to get to call that part of our home. And some of you in the room I know are familiar, and maybe you even met and or heard about Hubert Bond Owens, the founder of our college. He was definitely a torch bearer for the use and the good use of plants and landscapes and in the shaping of space for our everyday places. And so that design that you see at the Founder's Garden was Hubert Bond Owens' design. And it's a very formal garden, especially in the core, closer to the house. We would call that a fairly colonial or neo-colonial garden. And it's quite beautiful, and we love that we get to help steward that. And please come visit as much as you want. One of the other wonderful things is that it's not just for the campus. It's for anyone who wants to come and visit. It is pretty funny being on campus a lot and teaching to watch people, students, visitors, walk by and still think to this day that maybe they're not supposed to go in because somebody lives there. But it's very much in use. Okay. So a little bit about the context of what was going on in garden design and in landscape design throughout all this time that Cofer's was in business. It's really fascinating to think about. In Athens itself, the UGA campus is known really worldwide as being a beautiful campus. It really is one of the best. I've gotten to visit a lot of campuses being a professor, to go to conferences and meet other faculty. And we really do. We have a wonderful campus here at UGA. We're so lucky to have landscape architecture at UGA. And one of the things that was happening in Athens and in the original plan for the campus done by Charles Leavitt in 1906 was a couple of things. The City Beautiful movement is generally what that time period is referred to, around the late 1800s through up until about World War II, really. And also the country place era. And in this time period, many Americans were building country homes. This was their escape from the city, if they lived in the city most of the time. And cities were embracing a new idea of green space in the city. That cities weren't just about streets and buildings and transportation, but people that lived in cities needed somewhere green to escape to. Not everyone could afford to escape to the country house. And so in 1906, I have no doubt, and I'm not a historian, but I have no doubt that Charles Leavitt had in his mind the incredible model of Central Park in New York City, which had been designed and implemented by the late 1840s by the person we consider the grandfather of landscape architecture, Frederick Law Olmsted. And it continues to be a marvelous model today. So in some ways, the beautiful quads, quadrangles, and green spaces that we have on campus are like miniature central parks for the campus and for the city, and the parks that have come since then. This is still an idea that we're trying to carry around the world today. It isn't automatically known as places grow and develop, and as places become more dense and more people live there. Sometimes it's a fight and a battle to save the green space. Don't develop it into another building because the green space has great value. So a little bit about style, and I mentioned that sort of colonial design of the Founder's Garden, and you can see this very geometric arrangement of spaces here, a very simple plan, especially closer to the house. And as you get further from the house, it gets a little bit more organic, it's a little more loose, a little more natural. And it's interesting that this kind of general way of laying out a landscape in some ways is still very popular and still plays out today. Even, all of us who live in what we might consider a subdivision today, it's really not that disconnected from this idea and from even some of the earlier models that really go back all the way to Europe. European gardens in England, in France. Much of our landscape style today, for the most part, comes from that. I'll talk a bit more about that. So some more images of the garden. I'm about to step on a sensitive area here. Scoot it over. I move around too much. Again, the garden. Come have an event there. Come have a picnic. You don't have to pay anything to have a picnic. You can just sneak in. And of course, the beautiful knot garden. These were some of my students taking a freshman seminar on drawing and environmental ethics. Surprise. There a number of years ago. So just a little bit about this idea of style. And my goal tonight is to mess with your concept just a little bit of what your yard is supposed to be. Like, what's it for? So, Colonial Homes and Gardens, I have to admit, I stole this off the web today. I was quickly looking for a sort of a colonial house and a kind of a colonial style landscape. Very formal, right? We've got some nice, as Durr would say, green meatballs here to anchor the house. And, it's very, and it's very clean. And beautiful. And maybe even more fun is to skip to a couple more images here. And, this is probably pretty familiar to all of us, right? This might be your house or my house or grandma's house or whoever. But, after World War II in particular, the ranch house became popular. Subdivisions, population explosion, the baby boom. And we kind of carried those ideas forward, right? It's not that big of a stretch. Like, we got the green meatballs. The hedging is not quite as carefully done in this case. Sorry. We need to do some work there. But we like formal, right? Formal and controlled. The human is in control. Or we like to think we are. This is a little bit more upscale example. This is in my co-author David Nichols' neighborhood. I hope you're not here tonight. I'm going to poke fun at your yard a little bit. But it's the same idea, right? But come on, what is going on here? What, are we serious? Like, these look plastic. Is it alive? Are the plants not allowed to touch? Do we need to see all this mulch? Is that necessary? Joking. It's very neat and pretty. It's crisp. But it's also a little sterile and a little not very exciting. Okay, so a few books really quickly here. When I talk about colonial gardens, this book was published around the time that Hubert Owens was creating the Founder's Garden in the mid-40s. This is by a married couple, the Browns. I've now forgotten their first names. But America's Garden Book. It's still a fairly easy book to find. Several editions of it. And fast forward to the 80s and 90s. And check out this book sometime, The New American Garden. The title says it all. The New American Garden. This book was put out by a really cool landscape design and landscape architecture firm out of the Baltimore, D.C. area called Umi van Sweden, OVS. So if you Google OVS landscape architecture, you'll find their website. Look at their work. It's amazing. And you can just tell by the cover, right? This looks a little different than the evergreen meatball thing. And then a book that I love to use in my classes, and maybe y'all sell it here if you don't. Put this on your bookshelf to sell. Bringing Nature Home, How You Can Sustain Wildlife and Native Plants. Doug Tallamy, he's not a designer. He's an entomologist from the University of Delaware. So he's done decades of research on what insects like to eat, what native insects like to eat, and what they don't like to eat. But he's not doing it maybe for the reason you might think. He's not trying to kill the things eating the plants. The idea here is the opposite. Get rid of all the chemicals. Where are they? The concept here is a plant that has fed nothing has not done its job. And the reason for that is back to really what you're talking about, growing a garden and putting up all your food or a lot of your food for the year. My parents grew up the same way. And to some degree I did. They both grew up on farms. And we all like to eat, right? We like good food. This is all connected. It's all connected. Plants and gardens are not just about beauty. Obviously, they're about sustaining life. And plants have the unique ability, we're going back to like basic science, grade science here, right? Plants are able to collect energy from the sun and store it as food for insects largely, sometimes other animals, sometimes us. And then that goes all the way up the food chain. So we really need plants to do well on the earth for our own survival and insect populations, actually. So this totally turns our concept of insects really on its head. It's a total blast to do this class with freshmen. We usually do some wacky things in the class, like we eat, crickets and We look at landscape aesthetics, and yeah, we talk about why it matters. Why it matters. All right, so I just pulled a few images here of some, non-green meatball landscapes in conjunction with houses. In some cases here, this is the Washington Mall, actually, in DC. This is one of the gardens on the mall done by OVS. Beautiful space. And the whole point here is that a little bit less formal garden allows for wildlife activity. Pollinators, thankfully, have become a really popular, I would say, trend in our society. Everybody wants to do something for the pollinators. That's because of the food chain. But pollinators need habitat, and that's what happens when you let the plants touch. When touching is allowed in the garden. And when you plant a greater number of species of plants, certainly when you focus on native plants, or at least not invasive plants. So all of that's important. Because back to shaping our space and back to carrying the torch to the next generation, I want my kids to inherit a good earth, right? Like healthy food, a happy life, a bright future, right? They deserve that. And so, believe it or not, in some ways, these kinds of landscapes aren't making that more possible. And if you go to Talamy's book and read about what happens when we do too much of this turf, when we do non-native exotic plants that we maintain like this, zero habitat value. Zero. Almost zero. Okay, a bird may build a nest in your holly. That's true. You get 1 point for that. A few amazing landscapes that I think kind of show us a little bit the way with these kinds of landscapes. Okay, obviously these are civic spaces, so that your front yard may not quite achieve this, but this is the Lurie Garden in downtown Chicago. A shot of that in the winter, quite beautiful in any season. This is right over here in Atlanta. Now this is a rendering, so that's cheating, right? But the Beltline that's in some places implemented and in other places still in the planning phase around Atlanta, that whole corridor is slowly being planted as an arboretum in a series of native meadows. So this circle of nature around the city, really cool. And this image I use all the time. I really love it. And Talamy really writes about this a lot. And if you start thinking about your piece of the earth, if you live in a neighborhood, or no matter where you live, your little puzzle piece of the earth has an impact. It's connected to all the ones next to it and to everything else. And so if we start to think more this way about natural corridors and how wildlife need corridors to move and wildlife need habitat, we can make a bigger difference and create a healthier environment for us too, for us as well. I think it'd be such a fun experiment to take an existing subdivision where everybody's got a fence typically along their property lines, and get everybody to agree to take all the fences down or move them in closer maybe to the house and plant basically a shared green space between all the properties. Some neighborhoods are designed this way from the beginning now, which is really cool. But we could retrofit older ones too. It's possible. This is a front yard down on Spring Island. So getting wild and crazy here. Imagine no turf. This is all ferns and wildflowers that are native azaleas in bloom here. If that's too wild for you, we can put a little structure in there. You can add a couple of meatballs. It's okay. Stuart will sell you some meatballs and some of this other stuff too. Bulldog statue, yes. A little bit of turf goes a long ways. Notice how this little mown turf pathway acts like a frame, right? It's a frame. And we got this kind of wild, scruffy vegetation, but it's so interesting. All that texture and color. Where, where's William? Not weeds, it's nature, right? This is the texture garden at Swarthmore College in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. But, this same idea can be applied to a yard. Backyard, front yard, side yard. Turf serves a purpose. Kids playing, sports, having a picnic. We're not going to get rid of all turf, but we need more lush vegetation. All right. So thinking about these different landscapes, through the experience of different types of beauty, we come to notice, to care, and to deliberate about our place in the world. That's Elizabeth Meyer, her book on sustaining beauty. And this disgusting, isn't it? I showed up here with books for sale. I appreciate the press being here there in the back. But my colleague David Nichols, unless he snuck in somewhere, I think it's his bedtime. He didn't come out tonight. But I really appreciate him. We both teach in the College of Environment Design. And this came out in July. And it serves as a palette for doing planting design. You can look through over 1,000 choices in there. Thank you so much.